Do you think that these encampments and protests in general, all throughout the nation, are anti-Semitic inherently?
I do believe that there's a deep rot of anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism at the heart of the encampment movement. I found it telling that the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, has publicly endorsed the encampment movement. He's the leading sponsor of terrorism in the world. So that tells you everything you need to know about the true nature of the movement. And then there was the organizer at Columbia University who was caught on video saying that all Zionists deserve to die and that Zionists should be grateful to him for not going out there and murdering him. Like that's the kind of anti-Semitism that is running through the bloodstream of the encampment movement, and it's horrifying.
Many of your colleagues, Republicans and Democrats alike, have been calling it out. Some of your Democratic colleagues have visited encampments all throughout the country. Do you think your party needs to do more in calling out anti-Semitism?
It would be unfair to judge any party by a small minority. The overwhelming majority of Democrats are committed to combating anti-Semitism. And so the few elected officials who went to these encampments are fundamentally unrepresentative of the Democratic Party at large, and certainly unrepresentative of the Democratic Party within Congress. Most Democrats unequivocally condemn anti-Semitism on college campuses.
You introduced a piece of bipartisan legislation with Congressman Mike Lawler addressing anti-Semitism on campus called the Columbia Act. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
So there's a real crisis, a deepening crisis of anti-Semitism on college campuses. As you know, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act prohibits harassment and intimidation and discrimination based on race and religion and national origin. The protections of the Civil Rights Act extend to the Jewish community. And yet we've seen a lack of enforcement. The problem is not a lack of law, lack of legislation, it's a lack of enforcement. And so I'm partnering with Congressman Mike Lawler to introduce legislation that would empower the federal Department of Education to impose a federal monitor, not on every college or university, but only when there is reason to suspect a violation of Title VI. The present state of enforcement is failing Jewish students on college campuses, and so we need to try something new. And there would be value in having a federal monitor who is on site, who sees the facts on the ground with his own eyes, and who's reporting to the Department of Education about whether a particular college or university is complying with Title VI. And if the university refuses to bring itself into compliance with Title VI, then it's at risk of losing federal funding. You know, we have to leverage the power of federal funding to combat anti-Semitism on college campuses, which has persisted unabated for far too long.
Congressman, I am curious because you have been on the forefront of this issue for months now. Like I said earlier, what do you think when we're in this moment now is missing from the national dialogue since we're seeing these encampments come up, since we're seeing a spike in anti-Semitism on universities nationwide?
Well, I find that the media has been complicit in whitewashing the true nature of these protests, claiming that these are peaceful protests and that all these people want is an end to the war. And it's just fundamentally untrue. The organizers behind these protests seek the violent destruction of Israel as a Jewish state. These organizers speak in terms of armed struggle and resistance and confrontation by any means necessary. That is not a sign of a peaceful protest. That is a sign of a violent protest. And so I wish the media were more honest about the true nature of the protests that are unfolding in the United States.
Before I let you go, last month there were reports Mohammed Hadid sent you racist and homophobic messages on social media, and he said he responded by what he called an apology, but he did say this: he called you a shill being used by Israel. What are your thoughts on the messages and his response?
Well, I found his apology to be as fraudulent as the man himself. Mr. Hadid made comments that are so outrageously racist that it shocks the conscience. He said that I, as a black man, that I'm worse than the rats of the New York City sewage system. He said that I should wear a KKK mask to cover that ugly, gray-colored face of mine. What he said was shockingly racist, and if he had directed it against a different member of Congress, there would have been public uproar. But because I'm pro-Israel and a person of color, then apparently I'm fair game for racist invective.
Have you been receiving a lot of these types of messages since October 7th?
There is no issue on which I face more death threats and hate and harassment than on the subject of Israel. Yeah.
Congressman, what's next for your legislation, for this time in our country, because we're really at a boiling point here?
Look, Congress has to act urgently to pass legislation. It's not enough to speak about the problem. We have to actually legislate a solution. The problem has been persisting for far too long. But this is a moment to strike while the iron's hot. This is going to be the best opportunity we have to confront the crisis of anti-Semitism in the ranks of higher education.
Congressman Richie Torres, I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for the conversation.